Okay. So Patzer's Playground. What is Patzer's Playground? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to take, rather than looking at games of great players, we're going to look at games of players who aren't so great and try to figure out what we do differently to change the outcome of their games. So let's look at this example to start with. And we'll look at a couple of different situations to see what exactly we can think of. Okay, so the names have been changed to protect the innocent. Chess kid against chess kid. So we're gonna look at a couple of moves and see what happened. Okay, so just an opening. Nothing too special. Both sides are developing decently at the moment. Knight f6. So white plays this move, knight takes c6. So first little question is, how should black recapture? So you might have heard the rule capture toward the center. In this case, it's applicable. Why? Well, we want to try to get in this move, d5. And by playing this move, unfortunately, we lose a center pawn, and we're not going to be able to get in d5, which means it's going to be a little bit harder to activate this bishop. Furthermore, by taking this way, we can activate the bishop to a6. Yeah, but d5 is going to be our freeing move. Okay, so what did black do? Well, he's a Patzer, but he took with a b pawn. Okay, so white plays bishop d3, trying to complete its development. Okay, now as black, how should we go after completing our own development? What move would you suggest here? Okay, well, it's good I asked. So we definitely want to prepare castling. So we probably want to move this bishop. Moving this bishop, it's not as clear exactly where it wants to go, because a6 looks like a natural square, but it's also possible we want to go bishop b7 to help support d5. So the question is, where can we put this bishop? And there are actually 4 reasonable choices. Bishop e7, bishop d6, bishop c5, and bishop b4. So which one's best? Well, the answer is, well, they're all about the same. But I think one is slightly better than the others. And that one is bishop c5. Why? Okay, well, let's negate the other ones first. So bishop e7 is a little too passive. There's no reason why we need to develop it only one square when c5 is a natural square for it to go to. Bishop d6 does make sense because it's trying to forestall black from castling kingside. But notice white from castling kingside. But notice after white plays something like h3, we're actually blocking in our own d-pawn. So this diagonal looks nice, but in actuality, it just could come under fire eventually if white castles plays f4, and then e5 would be kind of embarrassing. So by playing bishop d6, it's kind of a temporary sort of threat of sorts, and we're not going to be able to push this d-pawn. And then the move bishop b4 is reasonable, but notice that we're probably never going to take this knight because our dark squares are quite weak due to our pawn structure. So even though we have the potential, assuming that white doesn't defend this knight, of doubling his pawns, I probably wouldn't make that trade anyway, just because I would be afraid that my dark squares would get too weak. So like f4 and e5 would make this d6 point, for example, a permanent hopping off point for white's pieces, and it would hem in the bishop on c6 or c8. But also it's liable to get kicked around very easily. For example, I play queen c2, you castle, I play a3, and all of a sudden now you're almost forced to take this knight, because if this happens, you just lose a piece. So, so be careful of like pseudo activity with bishop b4, because recognize you're eventually going to have to move the bishop. Okay. So anyway. So what did our hero play? Well, our hero, the Patzer, played bishop d6. So what move is bishop d6 meant to prevent? Why did black play bishop d6? And the bishop can really go anywhere in the English CTM. You're probably used to more of the Fianchetto systems, but I mean, really, the bishop can go anywhere. Especially in this variation where, you know, white just developed both his knights rather than playing g3. Okay, so this move is meant to prevent castling, right? Because if white castles, then this pawn's attacked twice, only defended once. So, white, being a Patzer, what do you think white played? Well, of course white castled. What else would he play? Alright, so as black, we're like, okay, well, we win the game. Bishop takes h2, check.
Check.
King h1. We win a pawn, we win the game, GG. Right? So, now what? Game's not over yet. No, certainly not at low levels. I did say GG. Doesn't mean it's over. Okay, so notice that this bishop is potentially being threatened to be trapped with g3. So now that we've made our material gain, we need to kind of get out of dodge. You know, bishop f4 is perfectly fine. Bishop e5 is actually okay too, because then you actually can take on c3, because now that you're up a pawn, like, he's going to have some problems figuring out his king side. But yeah, oftentimes when you make some sort of gain, you kind of need to regroup your pieces. I keep harping on that, but I want to make it clear. And in this case in particular, it's clear. So our hero played bishop d6, perfectly logical move. Okay, so what did white do? White played the move f3, trying to shore up his pawn structure. And as black, what would we do here? So this is absolutely crucial. This is absolutely crucial. This is absolutely crucial, because this move f3 should be setting off alarm bells in your head. It should also be setting off Star Spangled Banner in your head and fireworks, but most importantly, alarm bells. And why? Okay, because this move is not a good move. It's a bad move. In fact, it's a terrible move. Why? Well, it weakens white's dark squares even worse than they already were weakened. Notice that when h2 was taken, g3 was already a bit weak. But now that white's played this move f3, these dark squares are absolutely an abomination. And we've got quite a nice battery onto these dark squares. So the question is how to take advantage of these dark squares. And the correct answer is to play knight to h5. Critical move. Because this move is actually very, very, very dangerous, and it threatens things that are not easy to stop. So, for example, knight g3 is a threat. The question is, what can white do to stop that? Well, if he tries to move his rook, it's gonna be in for a bit of pain. For example, knight g3,
check,
king g1, and now probably just bishop c5.
check,
and this is starting to get ugly. You have to go like bishop e3. Then you have take,
check,
maybe, and queen b6, pin, hitting this b2 pawn as well. Yeah, you also have queen b6 check first, maybe.
check,
Forcing bishop e3, then taking on b2. That looks good too. Okay, but let's look at the more natural move, which is to defend this square with knight e2. Oops, not rook e1, so knight e2. So what can black play here? So gold star if you realize that this queen needs to get to h4. So the rest move is actually queen to d8. Threatening a mate in 4 with queen h4 check, bishop h2 check, bishop g3 check, queen h2 mate. And that's actually not easy to stop. Not easy to stop. Because if white plays the move queen e1, black has a fantastic knight g3 check.
check,
Interference. Now if knight takes g3, queen h4 check.
check,
Now this is no longer possible. King g1, bishop takes g3. And now I'm threatening queen h2 mate, so you have to play rook f2, and this is not something that white wants. So, knight g3 would have been, sorry, knight h5 would have been a move that almost wins material by force. But a lot of you guys were entranced by this move h5. Well, let's see what our Patzer played. h5. Okay. So actually h5 is not a bad move. It's just not the best move. So this idea of opening this h5 with h4 and h3 is quite reasonable. And it's a good move. But again, not the best move. So when you have your opponent on the ropes, like black does in this position, when he's, you know, being up a pawn, you don't want to let your foot off the gas, because one false move and all of a sudden things can be tricky. And we're going to see things being tricky in a second. So knight e2. Now black plays bishop a6. Alright. So now we're white. Our position sucks. We're down a pawn. Probably getting mated soon. Our opponent's getting ready to castle. Play h4, h3. What do? Do we just resign? Set pieces for new game? Try again? Or do we fight back? Yeah. So I enjoy good counterplay as much as the next guy. So what should white do in this position? I'll give you a hint. You need to calculate quite a bit. Quite a bit. Because if you see all the variations from this move, you're using some help. So I'll give you a hint that after the sequence of moves, white is actually still worse. So it's not like a white to move and win thing. But it's white's best move, and it gives white a fighting chance. So you always have to go for fighting chances. Because even when you're worse, you know, in Patzer's playground, being worse doesn't mean anything. Because fortunes change at the tip of a hat. So white to move and make it significantly better. Significantly better. Unfortunately, not all the way better, but significantly better. So I'll give you guys a couple more seconds to think about it. And then we'll try to calculate this together. Because again, it's not easy. So the right move, as some of you may have guessed, is c5. Okay, but the question is, does this really work? Does this really work? So the idea of c5 is we're threatening two bishops, right? So the simplest is, okay, if this bishop does something, you know, if he takes this pawn, if he moves anywhere, we win a piece, right? So there's really only one thing for us to consider as white in this position, because anything else that black could possibly try, we just win a piece with bishop takes a6. So the only move black could try is bishop takes d3 first. Does that make sense to you guys? Because again, I'm threatening both bishops, and you can't save both of them without taking on d3. Because again, if you move this bishop on d6, I just take on a6. Okay. So bishop takes d3. Okay, so right now, what's the material count, right? Black's up a piece and a pawn. Up a pawn first. Then up a piece. And by the way, bishop takes c5, bishop takes a6, knight g4. Don't forget, I have bishop f4 here. And again, I'm significantly easing my game. Because, okay, you have queen b6, I have bishop c4. You have knight f2,
Check.
sure. But notice I have two pieces for the rook. And now, once I play something like bishop d6, you can't castle, and all of a sudden, this is dangerous for you. So be careful. But you actually have better than that. So, okay. So c5. So again, we're forced to play bishop takes d3. Okay. So what do we do as white? Well, we have a couple of options, right? We can take on d3, or we can take on d6. Because we're down a piece, and we're also down a pawn. So we can kind of eliminate one very quickly. You know, if we take on d3, black just takes on c5, and now we're down 2 pawns, right? So you guys agree we can eliminate this one kind of quickly? There's no real compensation. If bishop f4, we can just play d6, then rook d8, then castle. I mean, it's just bad news. Okay. So we can't take on d3. We gotta take on d6. Okay, so far so good. Well, now what can black do? Black's queen's attacked, right? And so the only way to save the queen is to move it. But what else are we attacking? We're also attacking this. So what happens if black takes on d4? Or sorry, on d6. What happens? There's actually a couple of ways to roam, but the best is actually the move knight to f4, which just simply wins this guy. Because notice, now we have a pin here, so this bishop cannot move, and next move we're simply going to take the bishop on d3. Nothing that black can do. So this wins material. Knight f4 is the cleanest. Of course e5 works too, deflecting the queen, forking these guys, and then going to take here. But knight f4 is definitely much stronger. Okay, but we're not done yet, because as you guys already have jumped to the conclusion, there's actually something else we can do to save the queen, and that's to threaten white's queen. And we can actually do that while simultaneously taking a piece. So You guys are absolutely correct that bishop takes e2 is a valid move. Okay, so bishop takes e2. So now white has how many choices? He has two choices, right? He can take the queen, or he can take the bishop. So let's say he takes the queen. Take the queen. Black has no choice, really, has to take the queen. Okay, now don't forget, white is still down a piece. We got knight and bishop versus bishop. So we pretty much have to take the bishop. And okay. Here, what's the material? We are down just one pawn, but this pawn is kind of a bit forward. So unfortunately, this pawn is probably lost eventually. Although it's tricky to kind of take it at first glance. Because after, say, rook c8, bishop f4, d5, it's not really clear how black's going to win that pawn. But some combination of like king d7, knight e8, knight takes c7, white might be able to get the a pawn with like rook c1, c3, a3, but black is still better. I wouldn't say that black is winning, but black is better. But it turns out that actually white has even better than this. And the move that's better... So taking on c7, if we found out that that was the best that white could do, you know, it's actually better than not having played c5. So that variation is not bad. But actually taking on e2 is even better. Because what can't black do? What can't black do? Yeah. The answer is that black can't take d6. Because, as you guys all know, e5. Okay. So the point is, black would have to play something like queen b6. And now notice this pawn is causing black a lot of problems. Now say after something like bishop e3 or g5 or something, white's making significant progress. Still down a pawn, but having this pawn is definitely a decent compensation. So, playing this move c5 would have alleviated a lot of white's troubles, but it did require a significant amount of calculation. It's possible that white could have played c5, you know, just without having calculated everything and kind of lucked into that variation. But these are the type of opportunities you have to look for in the game. So white, of course, didn't play this game, didn't play that move, and played b3, which is nonsensical. h4, bishop b2, h3, e5, take.
Check.
And black went on to win this game. So, what did we learn? We learned we have to be accurate in the opening in terms of developing our pieces to the proper squares. We learned that even after gaining an advantage, we can't let our guard down and we have to continuously press for that advantage. And we learned that when we're worse, all hope is not lost, and we have to fight to try to get back into the game. Because I can guarantee you every single one of these things I talked about happen in pretty much every one of your games. Every single one, in some form. Someone gets an advantage, someone doesn't play the best move, loses the advantage, the other person doesn't capitalize. I mean it happens in my games all the time too. It just happens at an even more basic level at in lower rated games. All right. So now is where I ask for your guys' help, and if you guys have any games you would like for me to show on Patzer's Playground, please feel free. Send me a tell message, ICC. Send me a tell message on Twitch.